This is Monocle on Fashion, a show on Monocle Radio offering global perspectives and nuanced conversation on the worlds of fashion and style. I'm Natalie Theodosi, your host and Monocle's fashion director. For this week's episode, we give Gabriela Hearst a call to catch up on everything she's been up to, from participating at the Paris Peace Forum to launching her new menswear line in London a few weeks ago.
So every single fabric that you see in the men's collection came from the women's collection.
Then, for the week's big interview, I sit down for an in-depth conversation with Alex Carl, one of the most in-demand stylists and consultants known for her exceptional taste and encyclopedic knowledge of fashion.
Building characters through clothes was really like my main drive.
This and more on Monocle on Fashion. With her eponymous label, Gabriela Hearst offers a case study on how a fashion designer can operate sustainably while still growing on a global scale. This is why she was the one representing the fashion industry at the Paris Peace Forum last week, talking about simple solutions for successful sustainable business and the power of female leadership. Shortly after her talk on stage, she called Monocle on Fashion to give us an update on the event and everything else that has been going on with her brand, including a menswear launch and an exciting new retail opening that is now in the works.
I was in two panels. One panel yesterday for sustainable solutions with different ministers. You had the minister from the Republic of Nigeria, ministers of environment from all different countries. You had a state secretary from Germany on climate. It was a worldwide, and I was the designer there, but as mostly an environmental activist. That was really, really interesting. It was new solutions for the planet. We had to, in 3 minutes, to pitch, what do you think are concrete solutions? So it wasn't to talk about problems, more about, what are the solutions, which I'm very inspired by that, because I've had my own thesis and proven my own thesis of how to do the process. And today was a little bit different. It was holding the line for democracy with Hillary Clinton, that sent a terrorized video. And then you had Mayada Adil, that was she's a young leader from Sudan, SDG, United Nations, and she was very moving, especially with the genocide that's going today in Sudan, which is happening right now in Sudan, and it's not breaking through the news, and it's extremely horrifying what's happening. So she was here speaking in the Paris Peace Forum, but Sudan hadn't had a stage, and she very bravely complained about that in the forum. But it's good that we have these efforts of diplomacy still. But yeah, it's been quite active days, because in between I'm having design meetings.
Absolutely, I'm sure. But it is really reassuring to hear that, like you say, that these conversations, whether it's diplomacy or sustainability, that they're still going, and people like you are championing it and are involved, because it does feel like, I don't know how you see it, but it does feel like things have stalled from where we were a few years ago.
It's in the fashion industry, in our industry, is definitely not the trend right now. It's not something that being focused. That's not how we feel particularly. We're doubling down, but in the energy world, there's a lot of bad news and a lot of good news. And by good news, they don't sell newspapers. And one of the news that I get very excited, I don't know if you know that I've been following fusion energy for a while. And some of the groups that I studied, some private sector and public sector, they're 2 years away from commercialization. So we can have clean, abundant energy. In the big picture, we're here because we're fossil fuel dependent. That's our drug, right? 88% of the world moves in fossil fuels. We're not going to consume less energy. We're going to consume more energy. There is this idea that we're going to save energy. It's just that that's not going to happen. But these abundant energies are coming. And even the oil companies know. They know oil is a finite. But here we have a chance of abundant clean energy. And remember, scale is business. And when there's business, there's money to be made. And that's why I'm in the darkness of ages that it looks like we're entering. There's still bright spots that we can hold on and make sure that more people know about it. So we can start creating and envisioning. And there's also the solution for a lot of these problems that I heard today is you have to empower women.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we all really needed to hear this perspective about that there are still bright spots, because it does feel like the dark ages. And
it does.
I wonder, what do you think that fashion and the platform that the fashion industry has can play a role in delivering some of this better news or a certain sense of hope? And have we not been using its soft power enough?
We have an amazing power, which is everyone wants to come to a fashion show, and we just have to care, and clients care. This idea that clients don't care about what's going on in the environment it's not true. They still care. I see the data points. I see that this matters to most people. So we make our part, right? By the last show, I don't know if you know this about our past show that we just showed in Paris. But what was special about the show is that at the beginning of the season, 6 months before, I realized we had a lot of inventory of fabrics in stock. And I told the team that we're not buying any fabrics this season. We're going to use what we have. And that collection was done with 97% of woven fabrics that were dead stock. And we're going to production with them. So if I had enough fabrics, right? Can you imagine the big brands? They have a lot more. So what I'm proposing is you don't even have to communicate it in public, right? You can just tell your designers, just how it happened during COVID. Every 2 years, you have a recalibrating collection, because the reality in Europe is you can't burn materials. So you have to use what you have. So the less natural resources that we are extracting, the more that we're giving our environment a respite. So I think this overproduction that we tend to do is not driven by evil forces, just by not paying attention.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of the solutions are much simpler than we think.
Yes.
To change the topic slightly, a slightly more lighter topic, tell me about your menswear collection, because that launched in London around the Freeze and Pad, and I think it was such a highlight of the week for everyone.
Oh, in our company, men follow women. So every single fabric that you see in the men's collection came from the women's collection. So it's the same high standards that we have for our women, we have for our men. So in that way, we're matrilineal. I'm actually wearing right now a suit that was made in from the men's collection that we did for the men's collection, which is this pinstriped, multiple colors that was done based on the colors of the collection. But we believe there's a space for men's fashion where it's not classical or too boring, but it's also not too extreme, right? That it has its fun part, but you want to wear it. And I want to wear it. I want to wear a lot of the men's pieces because sometimes you want to feel oversized. So it has to have that high degree of desirability. And it's very interesting because the men's client takes a while to trust you and to get to know you, right? But once they trust you and get to know you, they go for the same pieces. We'll go for that sweater in different colorways. We'll go for that suit. So we have starting to have some very loyal men's clients.
Yeah, and I mean, it was interesting being in the London shop and seeing people actually really trying things on and shopping right there when they weren't having mezcal. But tell me, so it was...
drunk at some more.
It was interesting to see that in action, and I was wondering, has the physical boutique become a really important part of the business, especially in London? Is located in such a good spot between Bond Street is right next to the Claridges. How has that really driven the next stages of your business since you started opening shops?
Our business is mostly retail right now than wholesale. And we have a store in, our first one was the Carlisle store. I like to be next to hotels. So we have the Carlisle store. Then it went London, Mayfair, just before COVID. And so where my theory of the hotels was like, I thought it was a brilliant thing. And then I was like, what did I just do? But it's been a great location. Claridge's, in front of Claridge's. And then we just opened in LA. And we are a physical brand. You don't really know who we are till you touch us, right? Because there's more of a seduction than just what meets the eye. Yes, we're attractive to the eye, of course, but there's so much more intrigue to that you just see on a digital picture or like in an Instagram frame, which is always the challenge for us. How do we explain who we are in this digital existence? And the stores are really the future of the brand. We have a very exciting statistic, which is 65% of our clients, retail clients, go back to the store. Like 65% of our clients go back to the store. This is the future of our business.
That was Gabriela Hearst talking to us from Paris. If you want to hear more from Gabriela, you can also listen to the full interview we did in season 1, where she talks more about her design process, inspirations, and refreshing philosophy on fashion and life. And now, for our big interview of the week, we are in our London studio with Alex Carl, a creative I've been hoping to sit down with for a while now, having admired both her styling work and her latest book, Collecting Fashion, Nostalgia, Passion, Obsession. We talk about her career trajectory, what it means to be a stylist today, and the incredible archives she's delved into while making her book, including Karen Moschino creative director Adrian Appiolazza, who goes as far as to take out bank loans to purchase rare Comme des Garçons and Junya Watanabe pieces for his archive.
I started styling when I lived in Copenhagen, not quite conscious of like what styling was because I never assisted. So it was more sort of like telling stories through clothes and building characters. I always was really interested in film and in storytelling. So building characters through clothes was really like my main drive. And I suppose what kicked off my trajectory into styling that way. And so when I graduated, I went to London and
just all started.
intended to stay for 3 months and ended up staying for 13 years now.
Incredible. But has growing up in Denmark influenced you as well? Obviously, your mother's way of caring for clothes and that intimate relationship with objects seems to be a driving force. But because there's so much fascination with Scandinavian style, but Danish style and just the approach to living in particular. I wonder if that's something that you relate to or that has impacted your work, your style, or just generally your philosophy of looking at objects and good style and fashion.
I think you're always influenced by your roots, right? Whether you maybe see it in that moment or not. Like for me, it is much more than meets the eye. That's what I can appreciate now about Scandinavian and particularly Danish design. It has this label of like quiet luxury and minimalism, but actually it's really about the construction. And I think when I moved here, I really sort of rejected the notion of all of that. Yeah. And I was like, no, I'm not influenced by that. I'm much more this. And I felt much more sort of free here in London and, wherever I was in New York. And I felt like I could express myself so much more. And I didn't have these sort of like boundaries of like, no, it should look like this. It should be this. But I think as I've sort of maybe matured in my creativity, I can see that I am incredibly influenced by where I come from because there is such a care for detail. And it's much more about the construction of the design than maybe like an embroidery or, something more extrovert. It's sort of about when you look inside the garment or when you look under a chair, you see all these details that are not immediately visible to the eye. And that's what I find really fascinating about a lot of what I do today, except for styling editorials and working on campaigns. It's also working with designers on developing their collections. So it's research, it's, fittings of toiles, it's development of all of that. And it's really looking at, is the button here or here? How is that in terms of obviously look, but also functionality? What if we move like the shoulder a bit out here? It is really about those details that you have to care for, because it is not immediately visible, but it changes the whole way someone may experience a garment or a chair or another, design object. And I think that's probably what I've really learned to appreciate about my heritage now.
And it's so interesting as you're talking about detail and also just caring about the making and the craft of things. I wonder, given the pace of our industry now, are you still able to nurture that side of you and embrace that approach, even as kind of designers, I'm sure, are asking you to consult on a lot more collections. There's a lot more deadlines and all these things that everyone has to now deal with when you're working in fashion.
I mean, I think that's why the importance of a consultant is probably amplified now, because you are that person that can come in a studio and say, okay, but like, let's just look at this, or, how is this done? Or you also in editing, right? Because there's a lot more samples being made that maybe sometimes they should be made. And also, especially when you're working with, brands that are in the sort of more middle end, sometimes I feel like there is a huge proportion of pieces that are being produced without really properly looking at it before, where we could have done an edit, where we could have said, okay, what is the shoe for this collection? There's no need for 20 shoes. There could be like 8 or 10, and that is really also your job, is to sort of divert the designer into that headspace, right? Where you say, okay, let's just hold a second, look at this, like, how does this sit together? And like really sort of help people focus for that moment you're there, because that when you leave, it all goes back to like that pace. And of course, I feel that pace in other scenarios too. But I think as a design team now, you probably feel it even more, because there's so many conversations going on, in terms of merchandising and priorities and, oh, we need a bag, but we need this kind of shoe. And it's like everyone's sort of like, this group of flock of birds, like going like, okay, we're going to make this, and then let's go over to the right and make this. Like, whereas when you do what I do, you can sort of have the privilege of coming in, giving ideas, really trying to drive a focus through the collection, no matter the size. And then, you leave the room and you hope that they have taken in what you were trying to say, and obviously kind of do with your point of view on that.
I love this idea of like you as a stylist coming in and helping the team kind of slow down and focus. And I mean, there's a lot of conversation around this stylist-designer relationship that can really be pivotal. And now that there's this new wave of designers, it's like new people coming in, and you can, I'm sure, especially when it's a good stylist, like you can see the handwriting and the difference. When it comes, you're saying you're kind of trying to get people to sharpen their focus a little bit, but how more generally do you pick the brands that you want to work with and develop relationships with those designers? Because I'm sure it's quite an intense, intimate relationship.
Yeah, it is. And that's also why, you don't just kind of change every season. Hopefully, if things go well, there are these like very deep, nurtured relationships that also is not obvious to everyone. And I think that is what we need to steer away from, is this sort of intense pressure and focus on like the one creative director being like, everything is on that person's shoulders. If you see designers like Grace Wells Bonner, like Jonathan Anderson, like they've had the same team around them for like, 10 years, 15 years. And it's not about, oh, that stylist does everything. It's really like a big teamwork. And I think that's the beauty of what we do, is that you come in and you really appreciate, you know, the level of like these teams and their thoughts and everyone's experience, right? Because ultimately that's what creates the perfect dynamic, is all these experiences coming together and like sort of people feeding off each other, listening to each other, learning from each other. And I think this notion of like the creative director carrying everything, it's an immense pressure on anyone. And obviously there is that person steering, but underneath that is so much support. And also that's why like what you do as a stylist or as a consultant is not like about you coming in and like being like, oh, now I'm going to like put myself in front of this process and make it all about me. Like you have to come in and analyze like where is the right space for you and where is someone ready for this. Not everyone is sort of ready to work in that way, you know, where you're really developing everything. Someone is much more like some designers are really also stylists. Like I think that, you know, when you look at Celine now, like you can really see the way that that's put together, and the design is also so much about the way that Michael thinks about a character when he designs. And it's incredibly inspiring to see that as a stylist, because you go, wow, you know, he is really someone that like designs that wardrobe with all those details, and you can just see like actually the collection is thought like that from day one.
Yeah.
So I think that's like you know, not everyone needs to work in the traditional sense, and also it's not always up to you being like, now I want to go and consult on this brand. You know, I think that you sort of also sometimes have these ideas of where you'd like to work in general, right? It can be a brand or it can be a magazine, and you come in and you're like, you do it and you're like, actually that was not the right thing. You know, whether it's like a match with a designer or whether it's a publication, you may think it's the right thing because everyone else thinks it's fantastic. And like on paper, it looks good. But then when you actually go do it, you're like, oh, it didn't make me feel anything.
Something doesn't click, when you're in it.
But I think that that's inherently why you end up being guided by your gut feeling. You know, you have this like sense of what is right for you through what makes you feel something. And what makes you feel something might not look, if it's an independent magazine, might not look as good as if you did Vogue, but it might be much more of a positive experience for you in terms of creative development in that moment. And I think that's why you develop this, just this drive inside of you that's quite hard to explain, but it's inherently what makes you turn left or right, because you're the only person that can translate that.
It's interesting. It comes up quite a lot on this show recently, this idea of making decisions with your gut, or what you were talking about earlier, which is not putting yourself or your ego right in the center of a project and just seeing what your customer needs, what your team needs. And I think it's actually something that's coming a lot from women, and it's quite a modern way of thinking about your career, your business, which didn't used to. I mean, it might sound like common sense, but I don't think...
I can tell you it's the most annoying thing for your agents or your team when you go, it just doesn't feel right.
And everything is right on paper.
But it's this and it's this. Okay, what?
It's not tangible, but I think it's important to talk about and for more people to embrace this way of operating in some ways. If we also talk about go into kind of media, it's another kind of ongoing conversation about how that world is changing and evolving. And I'm curious from your perspective, styling for magazines and doing editorial shoots 10, 15 years ago versus now, how has that kind of changed? Is it still fun and creative, or is it a bit more regimented now?
I'm going to disappoint you. I didn't do editorials 15 years ago, but maybe 10 years
ago. Maybe 10, sorry.
No, 10 years ago I did. You know, I think it's very much up to you, right? Like, I think everything sort of, there's naturally the environment you're in and the industry where it's like there's certain rules, and the rules are unwritten, so you can decide whether you play by them or not. Some of them you may want to play with a bit, and then you might gain more confidence and feel like that's the moment you can say, you know, if you're working on an editorial and someone's like, oh, it's a full look policy, you gain that confidence and you pick up the phone and you're like, hey, really, like, wouldn't you rather have half of this look in and we can mix a bit of archive or a bit of vintage? And in that way, we can actually create a much more interesting picture. And most of the time, people are really open to that. You know, I think that if
That's
you
good to
don't
hear,
challenge
yeah.
the rules, you can't change them. And if you're too conscious and too scared, then, you know, you can't be creative. So I think it's very important to acknowledge that, like, all of these rules or, like, parameters or boundaries, most of the time, they're kind of just in your head. And if you challenge them and you sort of find ways to navigate them, you know, that's sort of how you create new expressions. Like if designers were like, oh, all my coats have to be this length, or, you know, I only use this fabric, or I have to do like this, everything has to be this color palette, it's like, then you can't feel free in your expression, and then you can't really be creative. I don't think you can be. I think it's good to have some boundaries and some sort of, you know, with yourself. It's quite interesting sometimes when you're working on something like, you know, I do a lot of work now with M. Le Monde, and, you know, naturally there will be themes to some of the stories, and it might be like that we're shooting high jewelry and you can only shoot it in certain ways because you can't, like, just go out in the water, you know, like you have to sort of, there are like some very real boundaries
Even
in
the
place of where
logistical
you can
side of
go,
things, yeah.
logistically. And it's also, in a way, incredibly exciting when you have that, because you go, wow, okay, so like now I have to create the most interesting picture with all of this existing, but without someone else feeling like that was in place. And that's quite fun. You know, it's quite fun to think, how do we make this look this way, but without someone going, oh yeah, but they were shooting fine jewelry, so they probably couldn't go there. You know, it's like, okay, how do you make it look like it's there then? Or how do you just turn the angle so it creates that same impression, or, you know, whatever your original intention might be. So I do think that, like, I don't know if it, I mean, I'm sure, like, maybe in terms of when, you know, Italian Vogue started, yeah, it's probably like a little bit more controlled today. But I do think that it's also a very inspiring time to be creative in, because I think the industry is so much more open to young talent, to talent that haven't had like a traditional kind of path. Like when I started styling in London, people were open, but they were also like, no one was a stylist and was like early 20s, you know? You were
had
an
to be an
assistant,
assistant for years
10
and
years.
years, yeah.
And the first question someone would ask you would be like, who did you assist? And when I came to New York, I couldn't tell my age because everyone was like in their 30s and you were like very much, there was this hierarchy.
Yeah.
And thankfully, that's not really there today, you know? Like you could shoot a cover of a great magazine and have shot pictures for a couple of years as much as you could have been a Mary Sorrenti or a Jürgen Teller and shoot a cover for that same magazine. Like I think it's a lot more mixed and dynamic now, which is really interesting. And the whole landscape looks so different. And I think that's what makes our industry very unique, also in comparison to like music and even film, which is so much harder to push through, and partly because of the time it takes to make a film. Or, you know, with music, it's so much about how many followers, how much attention. Like when you're at a magazine today, it's as exciting for you to find a new photographer shooting that cover as someone who's super established. And I think that's what's so positive.
Yeah. We should talk about your book as well, which is such an incredible project. And I think it started a really interesting conversation of, even when I looked at it first, about changing the way of thinking about clothes, not just as things that we shop and that are quite ephemeral, but collecting them in the same way you would art or a piece of design. How did that come about in the midst of all the other work that you do?
I had been introduced some years before I started the book, maybe a year, to Adrian, who today is the creative director at Moschino. And at that time, he was the head of women's wear, and I think menswear too, of Loewe under Jonathan. And it was just such a fascinating encounter. We got introduced through a friend, Adrian, who today has a more kind of public archive that people can rent from, designers can rent from. We rent from it when we have editorials. But back then, there was like no Instagram documentation of it. There was no mention of it anywhere. And we get introduced through a mutual friend, Angelo Flaccavento, who later wrote the introduction to my book and is a fantastic writer and dear friend. And he introduced us to do a project together around the archive, which I then visited and shot. And the archive at that time was in Adrian's apartment in Paris.
Oh, wow.
And it was just floor to ceiling, covered in Com, in Junior, in Margiela. He had like multiple of, like the broken plate tops by Margiela that I've never even seen in real life before. And I think that was a big sort of realization also around, this was that. There's so many things that we are not able to encounter in person or like really study, partly because of the pace. Designers just are given mood boards, doing mood boards, the collection research is really fast. It doesn't really allow for a lot of them to go and study their inspiration. So it becomes just like design teams bringing, inspiration to a creative director, a process of editing. And then obviously you're doing trials, you're doing your samples and you're sort of creating your own from that initial inspiration. But there is not that process of studying something inside out. And that was really my realization from a lot of these processes and chapters of the book, was the sort of focus on the inside of the garment rather than just what we see on the surface, because I believe that that's essentially what makes someone fall in love with a coat or a dress. Like Alex Fury has this amazing Galliano dress, which is lined with Quality Street chocolate paper.
Wow.
And the story goes that he made everyone in the atelier eat the chocolates to line the dress. And it's a couture dress and that Alex has, and we photographed it. And it was just this realization of like, wow, how incredible. Like, only you who wears it knows. Yeah. No one else knows. And that was what I really wanted to do with the book as well, was sort of like the antithesis to everything today, which is so much about, this is for the wearer, it's for the person that fell in love with the clothes. It's not to be documented on Instagram. It's not to show everyone like, how much money you have or how much access you have. It's really about this deeply personal connection with something. But ultimately that personal connection comes from a personal attachment from the designer into that piece of clothing. And I think that sort of realization was so immense and has affected me since, because it really affected the way that I think about clothes that I make with other people now. How do you give someone that experience, even if you may not have that same luxury of time, because that is like, time is the
the biggest luxury now,
today.
Yeah.
So, back to original kind of starting point, I could not get Adrian and his, incredible collection of Com and Margiela out of my mind. Neither could I get over the fact that he would take a bank loan to buy a piece of Com and then wait for it for like a year or two to arrive from Japan in a special crate. It was really for no one else. And I was like, who is this guy that, has all this stuff that he doesn't show anyone, but like clearly is like deeply emotionally connected to. And obviously he also has the ability to find some of these pieces that are like, I've never come across. And I think few people have actually seen in real life. And that sort of like started this development of, it was the foundation of the book, essentially.
It's such a refreshing way of looking at clothes, because every single piece seems like you could spend hours looking at it and talking about it and writing about it. I wonder, has it also changed the way that you think about buying and collecting clothes for yourself, or how you get dressed every day?
I think already before that, I very much,
I'm sure,
had this mindset of like, if I would buy something, it would be for the, purpose of also having it in my life for a long time. Or I would think about could I pass this on to someone else in my life? Or like, you know, would my kids want to have this in 20 years? Okay, now I have boys, but they may want to wear Phoebe coats, who knows? So I think in that sense, my own habits were formed before that, but have obviously been also like escalated through the process of working on that book, right? Because you really, like, it's a very interesting sort of question of value as well. You know, when you think about, you can buy an Azadine Alaya coat in like the most beautiful leather for £1,500, which is a lot of money, but you can hardly get, you know, a winter coat on many online stores, you know, of like a mid-level brand. And here you are with like a piece of history, essentially, you know, and a very unique piece that no one else is going to wear. And that you've found and created that sort of emotional response to, and had the time to really consider how it made you feel. And I think that's why I'm less interested in sort of buying things now. Like, I still will buy a few designers today where I feel like I can sort of see myself wear it every day. Like, I bought a Phoebe coat last year and I've worn it pretty much every day, you know, regardless of weather, regardless of if I was in Milan or on the playground. So I think that I still have that attraction to certain pieces, but sometimes when I see the way that the value is inflated of some things today, and the fact that then everyone has that same one bag, I'm just very much less interested, or I have less emotional response. I mean, personally, I feel like the term luxury when it comes to clothes is almost obsolete, because it has to be about the construction. It has to be about that detail that cannot be replicated and that someone has spent time on and that someone has touched. Like when you have a bag and you can really feel like someone's really put the work onto that bag, or a coat, you know. I think that's why Louise Trotter's Bottega and what Mathieu did at Chanel was so, like, had such a strong emotional response, because it had that sense of like, wow, someone's really kind of worked with this clothes, right? You could see it in the details, and it was almost like you could feel it from the women wearing the clothes on the runway, that there was that sense of like embodiment. I think that is the only sort of thing I can relate to with luxury today. Like, I think otherwise for me, luxury is something much more abstract. I don't think you can essentially put a price tag on that.
A big thank you to Alex Carl for joining us at Midori House and doing it straight after a flight too. And that's it for today's show. Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned. We have another big designer interview coming next week. Today's episode was edited and produced by Lily Austin. I'm Natalie Theodosi. Thank you so much for listening.